Hey everyone, Roadbreach here, and today we're taking a look at more games by The Voices Games. The Voices Games is an indie developer run by a man named Mathew Green. Last year, I looked at 4 of his games that were available on PS5, and now I've come back for more. But before we take a look at what I've got this time around, let's recap what I looked at last time we crossed paths. Lady in a Leotard with a Gun was a bare-bones third-person shooter with simplistic visuals, dumb, slow-moving enemies that you're able to kill way before they get to you most of the time, and a non-existent ending. The aiming was too slow for most of the time, and far too sensitive in the single side-scrolling stage. And to add insult to injury, you couldn't adjust your aiming sensitivity because there was no options menu. Not only that, but platforming is hampered because you can't control your jumping arc in 3D. Lizard Lady vs. the Cats was only a slight upgrade, with more aggressive enemies, ammo management, some semblance of a story, and better music. The story was that the cat gang pulled an Anthony Fauci and murdered a bunch of puppies for no reason, which angered the Lizard Lady enough to exact justice. The game ends with the Lizard Lady regretting what she did despite the fact that nobody should have sympathy for people who kill puppies whatsoever, and it said the story was to be continued in the Horde mode that had eye-bleeding colors that I do not wish to burden your eyes with even still. The Horde mode also had 3 maps, with the worst one probably being the narrow staircase map that you can fall off very easily. Spectre Wood had the same gun mechanics as Lizard Lady, but was a crappy horror game that had very few enemies and an ambiguous story, which I may have figured out while writing this script. The protagonist was killed by her fiancé, and she has to fight her way through the afterlife. Why did her fiancé kill her? I have absolutely no clue, because there is no context beyond the wedding. Gunducky Industries was a flight combat game with 1 weapon, 2 bosses, combat that's not fun, and no health pickups despite the fact that you can see a health indicator right here. It also had several good music tracks that went with the theme of the level, and the final boss really took the piss for the size of the level, lack of a boost, and massive projectiles. The game also had a mechanic where killing enemies highlighted in pink without dying would get you a trophy. This is something that the remastered version added. Thank you to Jake for telling me about this in the comments. And while I'm at it, one thing I left out was the narration in the beginning that detailed the story.
Contact with our forces has been lost. I presume they have all been destroyed by the robot uprising. Keeping low in valleys and amongst buildings to stay out of range of their anti-aircraft weapons, I have no choice but to fly my plane to the robot factory in an effort to destroy their manufacturing facilities once and for all.
Since Mathew Green seems to be the main guy behind all of these games, and his Twitter account says he's located in the UK, I'm willing to bet that's him. Now that you're caught up and informed about things I forgot to mention, let's start off with Newtonian inversion. I'm going to take a wild guess and say this game isn't going to look very good. Yeah, I called it. The character is most likely just a female model that was given some very simple modifications. Her space gear is purple with no other detailing besides a visor on her helmet. I had no idea that this was supposed to be the level end until I walked into it. The gun looks like a PlayStation Move controller attached to a pistol grip. Walking looks fine, but you can make it look really terrible by spinning the joystick, and sidestepping looks pretty bad too. The music is once again the best part of the presentation in one of these games. As for gameplay, Newtonian Inversion is a puzzle game that uses mechanics that I don't think I've seen before. You jump from platform to platform while hitting buttons to rotate platforms, and inverting gravity to get to the teleporter. Inverting gravity of the platforms is a case of hitting the buttons or shooting them with the gun. But it's not just flat platforms you hop to in order to advance, because there are also these little spheres that you can jump to and invert the gravity of. There's also a weighted sphere that is used to hit these massive buttons. Normally, the attractive gravity is represented with blue, and the repellent gravity is represented with red, but there's 2 different spheres that behave differently depending on the colors of the attraction and repulsion. At least this sphere thinks red is attractive. You're able to lose your balls if you're not careful, but you can hit the reset level button to get your balls back and try the puzzle again. And you're definitely going to fucking need it for level 12, because I tried over and over to get this ball to land on this button. The trick is to repel the ball when the platform is at an angle mid-rotation, and attract it to the other platform across from it. This is easier said than done, because it took me forever to get it where I needed it to go. It kept landing about 40 to 30 feet away from the button. Even if you know the solution to this puzzle, it's still a crapshoot to pull it off. And if I tried to repel the ball when the platform was going vertical, it would just pass through the platform and end up on the wrong side of the platform. What? What realm of physics is this where changing gravity makes an object non-corporeal for a second? That's a pretty nice word, not gonna lie. Not helping is the fact that the gun has extremely limited ammo. And no, you can't stop the platform halfway either. You have to invert the platform's gravity while it's rotating. That's not even the only instance of said problem either. One major issue with the game is trying to figure out when to hit the jump button when you're transitioning from one platform to another. I'd far too often overshoot a jump, miss the platform, and have to restart the level. I think you're supposed to hold the jump button for a little bit, then let go of it in order to float horizontally to get where you need to go, but I can't stress enough how much I think that's how it works. What other physics-based puzzle game do you know of where knowing the solution isn't enough to beat it? Another problem I have with the gravity mechanic is that jumping from one body to another can be a disorienting ordeal, but that's not too bad in comparison to this bullshit. I also randomly found that the touchpad on the DualSense can be used to control the camera, but it's far too sensitive for any practical use. This made me curious if the touchpad worked in other Voices games, so I reinstalled Lady in a Leotard with a Gun and found that the touchpad does work in that game. It also works in Lizard Lady, which is funny because the right stick isn't sensitive enough and you can't adjust it in any of these games. Level 13 is where the game introduces portals that you can walk through. I guess you could say we're now thinking with portals. The final level is where the music stops and you're expected to jump into what I believe to be a sun for one of the easiest platinum trophies I've ever gotten. Really the only platinum trophy I've ever gotten, to be honest. Newtonian inversion is actually kinda good. Sure, the presentation is lacking, one of the puzzles is a crapshoot, and it's really short, but this is a creative and fairly good puzzle game made by one guy. Next up is Aliona. The visuals are very simple once again. There's about 2 models for the enemies. The first enemy is a female alien with an arm cannon, and the second are these floating MODOK-like heads. The level exit is this fishtail looking thing that looks like it came from Newtonian inversion, and I gotta point out that Aliona herself is looking pretty thick. And much like Newtonian inversion, there's one track that plays throughout the game. The game is a platformer with combat. You'll magnetize to spherical rocks and platforms, and you'll get turned right side up in relation to said spherical rock or platform. While you do this, you can also fight off enemies with your blaster, but you can't spam fire because you'll run out of ammo and you'll need to let the gun recharge. The game will also switch to levels that are like a fixed plane platformer mixed with a twin stick shooter for some levels. But much like Lady in a Leotard with a Gun, you don't have control over your jumping arc, and the jump is delayed. There's also some obstacle course levels, one of which I was able to cheese pretty easily like this. And the last level has you killing the floating heads, and it says the end for now. There is another Aliona game on itch.io, but it's only on PC, and I preferred to play it on console. Aliona is also pretty good for the most part. It's challenging, and there's some variety in the gameplay. What the hell, I'll give it a shot anyway. Aliona in the terrifying wooden space station is like Resident Evil in a more unbelievable setting that looks terrible. Unlike the first Aliona game, the game has an ugly filter over it that lowers the resolution. The first enemy you run into looks like a poorly modeled homunculus. I mean, homunculi are already hideous, but this is even more so. For some reason, this game didn't want to play nice with my Switch Pro controller, and when I plugged in my Xbox One controller, the aiming was too sensitive. I guess I'm just going to have to make peace with using this horrible button slab. This game plays like the Resident Evil remasters, if they weren't very good. You have health, stamina, and ammo for your heads-up display. Much like Mathew's other shooters, you can't spam fire or you'll run out of ammo, and you'll need to let the gun recharge. Your stamina bar will run out if you run too much, and you aren't able to replenish your health whatsoever, despite the fact that this is clearly supposed to be a survival horror game. Not helping is the sluggish movement of Aliona in this game. She controls like she's drunk. If this was some sort of attempt at realism, then I want to bring to your attention the fact that that ship sailed from the jump when this whole game takes place in a space station made out of fucking wood! The first level is pretty easy to clear. All you have to do is just kill all the enemies. This is easy because the homunculi move slower than the zombies from Resident Evil. The second level is where I was hoping you just had to get to the end without being spotted by the dogs. But there's nowhere else to go, so it seems like I have to kill the enemies here. I was hoping that this was a stealth level, because these dogs will blitz across the level, beating the shit out of you while you can barely fight back and are far more likely to die than pass this level. I figured out a strategy to get past this level. Shoot at the dogs, then run behind them. It's best to make sure you're out in the open so you have enough room to maneuver around the dogs. Alright, finally, killed the last of these ugly shits. What's next?
I got this feeling, yeah, you know, where I'm losing all control, 'cause there's magic in my bones.
I spent a whole $1 on 2 levels. It's funny that Tori 3D costs less than this, but has more levels, better graphics, and more value put into what little you spent on it. Aliona in the terrifying wooden space station is garbage. It's ugly, it controls badly, it's not scary, and it's shorter than my attention span. Don't waste your money on this. Let's get back to the PS5 now. Now onto Violetti Gucci. The title screen is kinda creepy. You have this weird purple-haired girl looking at the player and looking away from the player. This doesn't really seem much like a good start. Unlike the other games, this is a side-scrolling platformer. The visuals here really remind me of a Sega Genesis game, but like only a Sega Genesis game if the graphic designer wasn't good at his job. This is also the first game I've played of Mathew's that uses the D-pad for anything. In all of the other games, the D-pad wasn't used for anything, not even the menus. But this is the first Voices game that I've played where I can use it at all. You can pick things up and throw them at enemies, or use them as platforms to get up to higher elevations. You need to be on top of the thing you're trying to pick up in order to pick it up. And I say things because there are a variety of different things you can pick up. The story is that this woman enters a cave. That is it. That's the entire story. Moving on. The first level is okay, but after that, the game becomes incredibly frustrating faster than you can say womp womp. Each level has a couple of objectives, with the main objective being completing the level when you touch the orb. The side objectives are things like getting to the end while not taking damage, killing all enemies, or completing the level within a certain time. This level here is like an unholy amalgamation between Ice Climber and Breakout, where you need to pick up the block and guide the ball into the breakable blocks. While you're doing this, spikes will come up and damage you, and you'll also take damage if the ball touches the spikes. I eventually beat this level without breaking all the purple blocks, but much like 4K gaming, I don't fucking care. I don't plan on getting the platinum trophy anyway. Some levels are the absence of fun personified, like this level where you need to pick up these green enemies and use them as platforms to give yourself a boost up. The big problem being that they move and you can't jump down, so you need to be incredibly fast to get them where you need them to be to make it up to the moving platforms. But the real absence of fun happens here. You need to jump on these bouncing enemies to make it up this level, but trying to jump on top of them is the most frustrating thing I've ever had to do in a video game. I don't want to hear 21 Kiloton complain about bouncing around in Doom Eternal when bouncing around there was actually fun, and bouncing around here is more obnoxious than Among Us fanboys. It honestly seems that they jump whenever you jump, but even if you do get to the point where you're not bouncing around like a rubbery ball of hatred, you still need to stack blocks by figuring out where the block is going to land when you throw it. No, you can't set it down or place it underneath you, because then it would have made the game fun! This level can French kiss my exhaust pipe for all I care. The second to last level has you jumping on enemies to safely progress through the stage. The last stretch of this level is the hardest part of the level. You need to jump across the enemies to make it to the end. But if you don't want to make it across tiny platforms that are a pain in the ass to jump across, then you can grab the first one and throw it at an enemy that just spawned to make a permanent platform. However, doing so is easier said than done, because of the throwing arc and the timing. So, much like Gunducky Industries, I gave up and looked up what happens if you beat the game. The last level has you being chased by this piranha plant from Mario, and if you collect every single orb, the character will say this: "With all the orbs I have obtained from this misadventure, I will live out the rest of my days as a very wealthy woman. From this experience, I have learned it is beneficial to take every stupid, unthinking risk that life presents me." After that, I'm kind of exhausted. What did I say in my last video on this same subject? I may not have played every game by this developer, but I firmly believe you should stay the fuck away from anything this developer makes. Yeah, I take that back. Considering I did like the first two games in this video, checking out something made by Mathew Green wouldn't be so bad, because you may end up finding something that you like. Just be wary of what you buy. Thanks for watching, and gotta zoom.